Next up, we have Samuel Kastberg from Sweden. I wanted to say Microsoft Sweden, but he's no longer a Microsoft employee. Yeah, Samuel has been here with us, is currently here for the fourth time in a row at our conference. And over the year, he has mainly presented sessions around BizTalk Server. This year, for the change, he will be talking about logic apps. And in his session, he will showcase the lifecycle of a logic app standard and investigate a couple of different scenarios around it. So please welcome Samuel.
Samuel Kastberg, talking about the lifecycle of logic app standard. So if we look at what we're going to talk about today is we're going to start about looking into separating your deployment artifacts. Then we will look a little bit about the built-in and managed connectors, and then the structure of the things that I will demo, and then working with connectors with a couple of demos, generating Bicep with the script, and then doing connections in Visual Studio Code, how you work with it and what you do with it. And then doing pipelines, and demo with some YAML pipelines. So, separating the artifacts that you have. Today we talk more and more about infrastructure as code. And many companies have the requirement actually to do deployments of your Azure artifacts with code. So this is something that we need to think about and do something. If you look at the solution that I'm working with, I have separated this in 3 different areas. So I have, if in the topmost, you have the common infrastructure. So it will be a little bit about something like your landing zone. There you have components that are shared by many solutions. You have like the service bus namespace. You have your app service plan, application insights, and so on. So those are released in a pipeline by themselves. They have some cadence that they are released with. Then in the middle here, you have the solution artifacts. So I have some resources that I need to create in Azure that are important to have there. They have their cadence. They are belonging to the solution itself. In this case, I have key vault. I have some secrets that I want to use in my solution. So I have located them there. Also, I have the managed connectors. So I want to create the connections there. I have the logic app itself. And I create my queues. So the solution uses some queues in the service bus, and I consider these queues are part of my solution. And I will, with Bicep, add them to the service bus namespace. And finally, in the bottom, we have the workflows themselves. That is, so to say, my code that I release. So I have 3 distinct areas. And this separation is something you decide the way you want to do it. So this is more, for me, it was a way to show that you have different things. You have the common artifacts, the artifacts that are resources in Azure, and the code itself. So if you look at the built-in and Azure connector or managed connectors, you have the built-in are running in process. So you have them running in your app's service plan. And when you have, as we heard yesterday, like in this picture, you see I have a call to ServiceNow. And then that is a connector that is managed. So I need to do a call outside of my code. So and that will be a call to consumption based and paid like an action. If we look at the structure of the things that I have. I have my workflows on the left-hand side. I have the application. And there I have my workflows. I will work with it in Visual Studio Code. I have my built-in connections there. And in the code, I have a file that is called connections.json, where I have the metadata that points to, in my case, to service bus. And then I have metadata for other connections that I have here represented as an API connection to ServiceNow. The workflows will run in the Logic app, and the Logic app is hosted in an app service plan. And the code, when we release it, will be located in a storage account, so it uses that. And also, it needs permission to use the API connection. So that is also something that we need to handle in our pipeline. When releasing things, we need to handle that, so we have all those things in place. And this will hopefully get easier and easier when we have the support for managed identities, so it will be probably easier to get in place. Take the right glass. So you have a resource type called Microsoft Web Connections that you work with. And when you're going to create your connections, you want to have the information about what do they need. If you're doing it in Visual Studio Code, you will get a nice dialogue where you have to enter the information, a connection string, a name, or so. But if you're going to do it with code, you need to know what is in there. So there is an API you can call and get information of what is needed. Yeah, you get some information of that. And if we look here, how it looks like when we have some Bicep for that. So here I have Bicep for creating a connection to for Bing Maps. So I have some parameters that I need. This is a module, and then I just create the connection itself. And the same way, you see it looks almost the same for MSN Weather, for ServiceNow, and for Twilio. So exactly the same pattern. And this is something that you should look into, creating some modules for common connections that you use, and reuse them on and on for your different solutions. Eventually, even having them in some kind of repository where you just lift them in and reuse them that way. Or copy and paste, of course. To ease this is it takes some time to if you're working with a lot of different connectors. While preparing this presentation, I thought that, hey, I need to do something about it. So I created a script that you have here, get connector Bicep. And the only parameter I have is what region, because you have different connectors are released to different regions. I don't know exactly how much it differs. I haven't checked really, but there are some kind of difference. So if you're directed to one region, it's good to sort of use that region, so you know. So here in my case, I have default to West Europe. And the first thing I do is I log on to that. And then I get, at least soon. Come on. A dialogue there, thank you. With a list of the different subscriptions that I use. And then I get a list with the connectors. The API returns 250 different connectors for each round. So yeah, here we have the list. If I select cancel, I get the next 250, and just to prove that we now have more than 500, we go for the third. And let's say that I use Twilio, so I select Twilio there. We have a lot of them, over 500. Yeah, there we have, and okay. And now we have generated this file. Just let's format the document, and we have the basic code here, create for you. It doesn't work probably with everyone. I have tested like 5, 6 different connectors, and it works. And at least you get it. I have found some issues when you have an integer. Then when the parameter is defined in the definition for some reason as an integer, but when you are going to use it in Bicep, it expects a string. So it's just to fix that. I will probably do some more work. I share this on my GitHub repo, so if you want to contribute, you're welcome. So if you want to use it. So this way you actually get the connections in place. Later we will look at the different pipelines that we have. But I think this helps. It's instead of doing it from Visual Studio Code, and this is at least the way I want to do it. I prefer to create a Bicep, do a release of them, and then access them from Visual Studio Code. So you have it in the GitHub repo. So look later on. There are in the descriptions, sometimes they have some parameters like passwords, and so they are described as needed to be in I don't remember the name of the element now, but it says it's like secrets. But when you're actually creating them with Bicep, they need to be in the parameter values anyway. So we have looked at that. And if we look at connection JSON, so it contains the metadata for both the built-in and the Azure connections. It contains development data. And if we're talking about the managed connectors, when you create the connection in Visual Studio Code, you will get the connection key that lasts for 7 days. After that, you will actually get a 403 connection. You need to sort of recreate the connection. Not ideal, needs to be fixed. You need to parameterize this file or eventually generate it, as I will do in the pipeline later on. You will see that I generate the file based on what connections I have in the resource group where I'm going to put them. It's based on a script that Lions showed last year at the Integrate. I used that and I have trimmed it a little bit more. You have in the connection file, you can have two things. You can have for differentiating different environments. So you can use the app settings of your application, and you can also have parameters there. As I said, use this pattern, create your connections with code. And I have a solution to actually get around a little bit this problem with the connection keys. So I tried to sort of, if you look into in the background, it should be using your identity. So this is Kent Wagner, please give us to use the identity instead from Visual Studio Code. So this would be a lot easier, but we can get around that. So what happens is when you're creating your connection, you are allowed to get these keys. And if you look at the code that I have here, I actually do that. So when I'm creating, I will list the connection keys, and I tell it how long time I want to have. In my case, I chose 30 days. So is it reasonable or not? So I get that. And you can only get these keys when you are creating the resource. I tried to do, in Bicep you have something that you can say that a resource already exists. So use that. I tried that first to get the keys, but that doesn't work. You need to sort of say, I'm creating this resource. So when you run next time, it will create the resource again, but it's already there, but you can actually get new keys. So this way you get them. What I do is that I store them. If this environment, I only want to do this if I'm in the lab or if I'm dev. I don't want to do this in dev, QA, prod, and so on. So I'm using in Bicep sort of just saying if it's lab or dev, then save it to Key Vault. Otherwise, just skip it. And I have written another script, also in the same, that you have in the same location, that helps you with this. And what it says is that go to the Key Vault and go to a certain resource group, and it gets the information from, you see, local settings JSON. So I'm actually using local JSON file from there, and we had some issues there. Okay, usually it works, so sorry for that. What you get is a text file where you have these keys that end up in, not in this one, too many instances of this one is the solution. Infrastructure, and we have here. So they end up here. So, basically you get the last 3 lines. I did run the script like 1.5 hours ago, and it worked. So I did some error. So you get these lines. You can copy them from a text file that is created and paste it in here, and it works. And you also get these files. or not the entire file, but the manage API connection section of, so you can take them. It goes to the resource group. It finds, okay, you have three different connections. It generates a file with the information. You take it here. It's still a workaround. I mean, I don't see it as something else than a workaround. And you paste it, and then you can start using it in Visual Studio Code. So that way, and if you are working more than the period that you have said, you just run the pipeline once again to create the connections, and you will get new keys. You can get out the keys from Key Vault again. So, and if we look into the environment, I have here, if I look into my secrets here, this is the dev environment. And we open here and copy it. And we go to here. And we see that it's a token that is used. And here we can see that it works until the 13th of July. So that is, and you can work with it over and over again and extend the time over time. So let's continue. So when you're working with your connection, things happen. So if you look into one of these, when you start working, when you say with your workflow, you say that use connectors from Azure. What happens then is that in the you get into your local settings JSON. There you get information about what resource group, what tenant, and so on you're going to use for working with it. So that's the first step. Then you actually can start working with the connections themselves. Other files that you want to parameterize and work with is the parameters JSON. And there you can have app settings. And these are parameters that you're getting into your logic apps to get them working. And if we look at the parameters file here, and here you see that I have the environment. And if I start here, we see the result of this. Here, what this calls an API that generates an event that finally ends up in different queues as subscriptions. And then I use Twilio. And there we come, it's snowing in Italy. From dev, and then we get from test. So we took two ways, and the test there is based on the parameters. So here, this is a parameter that I actually set in my pipeline, setting as an environment app setting. I'll work with it. Then you have the host JSON. There you have things like, if you have, let's say that you're working with large messages with service bus. It might take some time to get those large messages, so you want to set some timeout values there. And that's the kind of things. And eventually you want to have lower timeout values in your development or in your test environment, just to to sort of get more errors, so you can solve those kind of things. So that is, and that is using the normal Azure DevOps. You have set some token that you replace in your pipelines with that. So if we look at the pipelines, I have three. The first two, the one that with the common infrastructure, that is quite straightforward, and the same with the one for the solution infrastructure. It's just using the Azure Resource Manager template deployment. And if we look at that, I'll go to my pipelines. Look at the common infrastructure. And it's just doing straightforward the resource manager template deployment. You set the parameters, the connection to resource, the resource manager and the subscription that you want to work with. And resource group, you point to the Bicep file and parameters file that you want to use. So there you have the main Bicep and then the parameters that I'm going to use. And then you get that released to the different environments. And next, the other pipeline that I have for the solution infrastructure looks exactly the same. And why should you do this? I mean, you want the environments to look the same. So if you compare the different resource groups that we have here. So if we look at dev, we have a good naming convention. At least it follows something. So probably I'm not as rigid as I should be. But you know that when I release something to dev, it looks exactly the same as when I release it to the next environment. And using the same naming convention, some differentiator, so I see that this is dev, this is test, this is production, and so on. So if we compare this with looking to the one that I have for test, we see that we have exactly the same components, and you have the same naming that I'm using. Then we have the solution itself. We want to get the code out, and we have the connections JSON. We have the parameterization that we need to handle, and we need to package the files and finally do the deployment itself. So if we look at that pipeline, we see here, first I generate the connections file where I have a script that you also have. What it does, it takes as a parameter, it takes where are we going, what resource group are we going to, and it looks like look after the connections that we have there. So then it creates the code to actually connect your logic app to those connections. And of course, it should be the same connections that you're using all over the way, all the way, but in different resource groups. Then we have, with that, we will have one connection file that I can use. And then we just package. So we use the archive to create a zip file for that. And then we use the Azure function deploy. So if we look here, we see that we have a release here where we actually have deployed to the two different environments all the way, getting the code, generating the connection file. You see that it finds the different connections that I have in the resource group and generated the file. I replace the connection file that I have while I'm developing and replaces it with the one that I have generated there. Create the archive and then thus the release. And with that, the environment is done. And exactly the same, of course, for next environment. So that is, and this is the great thing with actually automating your releases. It's nothing new, but it's something you need to do. We have to stop doing things manually because we do things wrong. So for troubleshooting, you have, of course, in your pipelines, you have the output telling you, hey, now you didn't have the rights to do this or that. But sometimes the responses we get are sort of shaky, or I see some nodding. The responses might not be as complete as you want to. So, what you should do in most of those cases is actually go to the resource group where you have done the deployment to, and there you have actually information telling you a lot more about what actually happened. So in this case, you see that I had some validation and I was trying to use some tags that didn't exist. And that broke my release. So if you don't understand the output, always go to the resource group and look there, and you most often find the resources there to actually get further with that. We have looked at the different YAML pipelines. And with that, I'm done. I think we are okay timing. Yeah, perfect. You have the GitHub repo. There you have the scripts. And I will add after today, I will add all these different projects that I have shown in Visual Studio Code. So if you want to dive deeper, there are a lot of cool stuff. At least I think it's quite cool, done with Bicep, but details that are not interesting for the presentation itself, and setting rights and that kind of thing, creating subscription for the event grid event and that kind of things. And if you want to learn Bicep, I love it. So go to Microsoft Learn, and there you have really, I'm quite sure in 2 hours you're up and running with Bicep and doing cool things. So with that, thank you. So, yeah, questions? Yeah? We have time?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah?
Sure.
Any questions? Yeah?
Microphone?
I was wondering, you showed that with DevOps pipelines you can deploy, well, the logic apps, of course, and several connections, etc. And since we're looking at the Arc and the OpenShift cluster, which is on-premise, I was wondering if you can do the same on an on-premise platform. Probably not the managed connections because that's not available there. I'm not sure what you can and can't do. Not sure if you're the right.
I'm definitely sure that you can do it. I haven't tested it, so I can't say exactly how. I have a ton of people that are really, really skilled on Azure DevOps that email me. First last at solidify.dev, and we get it. I'm not that skilled at it, but yeah. Some more?
Anybody? Still time?
Okay.
Nobody? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Cove.co